Like, we smoke big woods after we hear something about murder.
Turn shit to cold slaughter. Run down 4 deep, the boys ain't see no car.
Released their 2025 safety rankings, 3 American cities stood out for all the wrong reasons. New Orleans claimed the top spot as the most dangerous. Memphis came in second. And right there at number 3 sits Baton Rouge, Louisiana. This isn't some clickbait ranking or sensationalized list. This is based on hard data from the FBI, police reports, and real-world metrics that measure actual violence happening on the streets right now. Here's what that number 3 ranking actually means in practical terms. If you're a resident of Baton Rouge, you have a 1-inch 99 chance of becoming a victim of violent crime. Not property crime, not petty theft. We're talking about violence that could end your life or change it forever. The overall crime rate sits at 66.78 incidents per 1,000 residents, which makes Baton Rouge more dangerous than 99% of American cities. Let that sink in for a second. Out of every 100 cities in this country, Baton Rouge ranks safer than just one of them. The violent crime rate specifically is 2.5 times higher than the national median. Property crime, 3 times higher. And this is Louisiana's capital we're talking about. The seat of state government. A city built on oil money, home to major petrochemical companies like ExxonMobil and Dow Chemical that employ over 20,000 people. Yet somehow, despite this economic engine, Baton Rouge has become a war zone in certain neighborhoods. But here's the paradox that makes this situation even more complex. While Baton Rouge sits at number 3 on this deadly podium,
record shattered in Baton Rouge.
The city has seen 34 homicides in just the first 3 months of this year, shattering the record of 27 homicides in the first quarter of 2021.
It's actually not the most dangerous place in Louisiana when you break down the numbers by per capita rates. Smaller cities like Marksville, with its staggering 2,209 violent crimes per 100,000 residents, or Monroe, where concentrated poverty and under-resourced policing create explosive crime rates, actually surpass Baton Rouge statistically. So why does Baton Rouge get the number 3 national ranking? Size matters. With a population hovering around 219,000, the sheer volume of violent incidents here creates a different kind of danger. Urban density, systemic economic disparity, and the concentration of gang activity all combine to make this a hotspot that can't be ignored. The contrast within the city itself tells the real story. Head south to neighborhoods like Shenandoah or Inniswald, and you'll find suburban tranquility where violent crime rates drop to 2 per 1,000 residents. But venture north of Interstate 10, and you're entering a completely different reality. There's a zone in Baton Rouge that locals have started calling the Murder Triangle. It's not an official designation from the police department or city officials. It's what residents themselves have named the area stretching between Interstate 110 and Flannery Road. This isn't hyperbole or street mythology. The data backs up the nickname in the most brutal way possible. In 2024, this relatively small geographic area accounted for 80% of the city's homicides. Think about that ratio for a moment. 1/5 of Baton Rouge's territory generated 4/5 of its murders. The crime density in this zone reaches 185 incidents per square mile, which is 7 times the national median. These aren't random crimes scattered evenly across a map. This is concentrated, sustained violence happening in the same neighborhoods month after month, year after year. 6 specific neighborhoods dominate the danger zone. Scotlandville, in the northern part of the city, sees violent crime rates double the city average, which, remember, is already 2.5 times the national rate. Gang turf wars define daily life here, and residents face a 1-inch 15 chance of becoming property crime victims. Brookstown records assault rates 3 times the city average, with drive-by shootings occurring near schools where children walk to class. Guerillas in the southwest has become a robbery hotspot, particularly around low-income apartment complexes where vulnerable residents make easy targets. Eden Park operates as a cluster point for homicides, with drug houses openly conducting business. Melrose East suffers from burglary rates 4 times higher than average, and its proximity to major highways makes it a trafficking corridor for drugs and stolen goods. Belfair represents the newest hotspot, with an emerging youth violence problem that's getting worse each year. Now here's where the inequality becomes impossible to ignore. Drive south toward the LSU campus area, and violent crime drops to 4 incidents per 1,000 residents. In Shenandoah, it's just 2 per 1,000. That's a 500% difference in safety within the same city limits. You can literally drive 10 minutes and go from one of America's most dangerous zones to a neighborhood that's statistically as safe as many suburbs. What causes this concentration? Poverty rates in the murder triangle hit 35 to 45%. Unemployment exceeds 10% in most census tracts. Police presence is minimal and ineffective. And gentrification in areas like Mid-City is actively pushing low-income residents out of revitalizing neighborhoods and deeper into these danger zones, making an already bad situation worse. Let's talk about the body count. In 2024, Baton Rouge recorded 113 homicides. That translates to a murder rate of 51.8 per 100,000 residents. To put that in perspective, the national average sits around 12 per 100,000. Baton Rouge's rate is more than 4 times higher. 4 times more likely that someone will be killed in this city than in a typical American community. Now, city officials will point out that 113 represents a 15% decrease from 2023 when 126 people were murdered. And that's technically true. The trend line is moving in the right direction compared to recent years. But let's add some context that the press releases tend to skip over. In 2020, during the pandemic, Baton Rouge hit its modern peak with 149 homicides. That year saw a murder rate of 68 per 100,000, making it one of the deadliest years in the city's history. So yes, things have improved since that nightmare year, but we're still talking about murder rates that would be considered a crisis in most American cities. There's a seasonal pattern to the killing. Between June and August, 40% of the year's homicides occur. Summer in Baton Rouge isn't just hot in terms of temperature. It's the season when gang disputes over territory escalate, when young people out of school get pulled into street conflicts, and when the combination of heat, proximity, and tension creates deadly situations. Law enforcement knows this pattern. They can predict with reasonable accuracy when violence will spike, but knowing when it's coming and having the resources to prevent it are two very different things. Beyond homicides, the violent crime picture includes aggravated assaults at 7.81 per 1,000 residents, which is 196% above the national average. And here's a critical detail. 85% of these assaults involve firearms. We're not talking about fistfights that get out of hand. These are gun crimes. Robberies occur at a rate of 1.38 per 1,000, running 106% above average. Carjackings near LSU increased 12% in the past year, targeting students and visitors who make easy marks. Sexual assaults register at 0.67 per 1,000, which is 76% above the national rate. These crimes are notoriously underreported, so the real numbers are almost certainly higher. Property crimes continue the pattern with 56.67 incidents per 1,000 residents. Home burglaries hit 13.31 per 1,000, an astronomical 430% above the national average. Motor vehicle thefts reached 9.21 per 1,000, with Kias and Hyundais being specifically targeted due to a well-known security vulnerability. Statistics can numb you after a while. Numbers on a page don't capture what it actually feels like to live in a place where violence isn't an abstract concept, but a daily reality. So let's hear from people who've experienced Baton Rouge's danger firsthand. A nurse who worked in the operating room at the Children's Hospital shared her story on social media in November 2025. She wrote about seeing the aftermath of drive-by shootings and gang violence coming through the emergency department. Kids, teenagers, young adults with their futures stolen by bullets. She and her family made the decision to leave Baton Rouge years ago when they started having children. The tipping point wasn't a single incident, but the accumulation of seeing too much trauma, too much preventable violence. She didn't feel safe raising her kids there anymore. And she's not alone. About 5,000 residents left the city in 2024, citing safety concerns as their primary reason for moving. Another resident, a father in Mid-City, posted in May 2025 about sitting on his front porch with his Glock, watching police investigate a shooting 1 block away from where his child sleeps. 10 or more full automatic shots had ripped through the night. He wrote about telling himself that if he ever felt unsafe in his own neighborhood, it would be time to move. Now here he was, armed on his own property, in a supposedly revitalizing part of the city. C.K. Bufarach, a local reporter, shared her assault story in September 2025. She was repeatedly punched in the head and tackled to the ground while calling 911, begging for help. A month later, no arrests had been made. She mentioned that her attackers had previously poured gasoline on someone. Her question resonated. What will it take for the system to act? One resident documented their experience in a series of incidents that read like a catalog of urban dysfunction. An armed robbery nearby. The day before, a man screaming at his girlfriend in what looked like domestic violence escalating. The previous month, being pursued by a group that had been kicked out of the mall. A week before that, his fiancée being stalked. This wasn't spread over years. This was weeks. Then there are the victims who don't get to tell their stories. Kaylin Ford, 22 years old, was shot and killed by her ex-boyfriend in May 2025. Deputies had just finished clearing her home and left minutes before he returned and murdered her. The system checked on her, confirmed she was okay, and left her to die. A 3-year-old woman was stabbed to death in October 2025, with her attacker then setting himself on fire. Survivors of sex trafficking testified about being forced into hotels by a trafficker named Reed, who was finally sentenced after years of abuse. And throughout 2024, more than 200 people died from fentanyl overdoses, each one leaving behind families wondering how a single pill from a corner dealer could end a life in hours. You can't understand Baton Rouge's violence without understanding the economic reality that feeds it. This city exists in a state of extreme inequality that would be shocking if it weren't so normalized. Let's break down what poverty actually looks like here in numbers that matter. Nearly 25% of Baton Rouge's population lives in poverty. That's 55,000 people trying to survive below the poverty line in a city that's supposed to be thriving on oil money. It's the second highest poverty rate in Louisiana, a state that already ranks near the bottom nationally in almost every economic indicator. But here's a statistic that really cuts deep. 24.8% of children in Baton Rouge live in poverty. That's the worst child poverty rate in the United States, except for Mississippi. We're talking about 1 in 4 kids growing up without adequate food, housing, or educational resources. The median household income sits at $49,944, which sounds reasonable until you compare it to the national average of $75,149. Families here earn 35% less than typical American households. Per capita income comes in at $27,599, creating a situation where single adults and individuals struggle even more than families. Unemployment officially stands at 4.7%, but that masks the reality in the northern neighborhoods where jobless rates exceed 8%. Now add the economic structure that created the situation. Baton Rouge's economy runs on petrochemicals. ExxonMobil and Dow Chemical provide over 20,000 jobs, but most of these positions pay between $15 and $20 per hour in an era of crushing inflation. Those aren't poverty wages, but they're not stability either. Tourism provides seasonal spikes around LSU football games and plantation tours, but seasonal cash doesn't build generational wealth or community stability. The gang economy fills the gap that legitimate work can't. 8 major criminal organizations operate in Baton Rouge, including the Bottom Boy Guerillas and Grim Gangsta Disciples. These aren't street corner crews. They're structured operations responsible for 60% of the city's homicides. In 2024, federal prosecutors indicted over 50 members under RICO statutes, treating them like the organized crime syndicates they've become. They recruit young people through social media, offering money and belonging that underfunded schools and a broken job market can't provide. Then there's the fentanyl epidemic. Overdose deaths increased 300% since 2015, with 80% involving fentanyl or fentanyl-laced drugs. The Interstate 10 corridor brings drugs up from Houston, and trap houses in Scotlandville distribute them throughout the city. In 2025, law enforcement seized 500 kilograms of drugs, which sounds impressive until you realize that supply is functionally infinite. The dropout rate from Baton Rouge public schools hits 15%, ensuring the next generation will face the same limited options. Here's something that should terrify you if you live in Baton Rouge. The murder clearance rate is below 40%. That means if someone kills you in this city, there's less than a 50-50 chance your killer will ever be arrested. The police department knows who needs to be investigated. They know which neighborhoods generate the most violence. But they simply don't have the resources to do the job effectively. The Baton Rouge Police Department currently operates with a 20% shortage in staffing. They need approximately 200 more officers just to reach adequate coverage levels. And this isn't just about having warm bodies in uniform. Experienced detectives are retiring or leaving for departments in safer cities with better pay. The ones who remain are overworked, under-resourced, and fighting a losing battle against gang violence that never stops. The result? Assault cases increased 3% in 2024, even as homicides decreased. When police can't maintain consistent presence in the most dangerous neighborhoods, criminals adapt and escalate. Response times in the murder triangle are significantly longer than in southern neighborhoods. When you call 911 from Scotlandville versus Shenandoah, you're getting two different levels of service. The equipment available to officers is outdated in many cases. Community policing programs that show effectiveness in other cities can't be implemented here because there aren't enough officers to staff them. Then there's the trust problem. In 2023, a major investigation uncovered abuse allegations related to police conduct at a department warehouse. When the people you're supposed to protect don't trust you, they stop reporting crimes. They handle problems themselves. They don't cooperate with investigations. And the cycle continues. Many victims of assault, robbery, and even sexual violence never make official reports because they don't believe anything will come of it. When your clearance rate is already below 40%, that perception becomes self-fulfilling. The court system isn't much better. Remember Kaylin Ford? Sheriff's deputies cleared her home, confirmed she was safe, and left. Her ex-boyfriend returned and murdered her minutes later. The system did everything by the book, and it failed catastrophically. The reporter who was beaten while calling 911 waited a month without any arrests. Her attackers had previously poured gasoline on someone, showing a pattern of escalating violence, yet they walked free. Budget battles at City Hall have consistently prioritized other municipal concerns over public safety. The police department competes for funding against infrastructure, parks, and administrative costs. Federal grants have helped with $10 million allocated for anti-gang task forces in August 2025, and $5 million for body cameras and community policing initiatives. But grants are temporary. Sustainable change requires permanent funding commitments that local politicians have been unwilling to make. Let's end on something other than despair. Because despite everything we've covered, there are legitimate reasons to believe Baton Rouge's trajectory can change. Not easily and not quickly, but it's possible. The numbers show some improvement. Homicides dropped 20% statewide in 2024 and 2025. And Baton Rouge contributed to that decline with its 15% reduction. The city implemented a ShotSpotter system that uses AI-powered acoustic sensors to detect gunfire and alert police in real time. In its first year, it identified over 300 shooting incidents that might have gone unreported. That's 300 chances for police to respond, collect evidence, and potentially prevent retaliation. Community organizations like NAMI Baton Rouge provide victim support services that the overloaded police department can't offer. Violence interrupter programs modeled on successful initiatives in other cities trained 500 young people in 2024 to de-escalate conflicts before they turn deadly. These aren't cops or social workers. They're community members, often former gang affiliates, who have credibility on the streets that outsiders never will. Federal money is flowing in. The Department of Justice's Violent Crime Initiative designated Baton Rouge as a priority city, unlocking resources that local budgets could never provide. $10 million for anti-gang operations, $5 million for technology and training. These aren't permanent solutions, but they buy time to build sustainable infrastructure. The Riverfront Revitalization Project aims to create economic opportunities in areas that currently offer none. LSU continues to be an economic anchor, and the energy that thousands of students bring to the city provides cultural vitality that's easy to overlook when focusing only on crime statistics. Baton Rouge has Jazz Fest, incredible Cajun food, and a resilient community that refuses to abandon their city despite the violence. Projections suggest that if current trends hold and funding continues, violent crime could decrease another 10% by 2026. But that's a big if. It requires sustained political will, continued federal support, and community buy-in. It requires addressing child poverty, fixing the schools, creating legitimate economic opportunities that can compete with gang recruitment. For anyone living in or visiting Baton Rouge, the advice remains the same. Stay south of Interstate 10 when possible. Travel in groups, especially after dark. Use real-time alert apps like Citizen to know what's happening around you. Lock your car, secure your property, and be aware of your surroundings. The city isn't hopeless, but it's not safe either. That's the reality. Baton Rouge can be saved, but it will take more than good intentions and temporary grants. It will take a fundamental commitment to addressing the inequality and systemic failure that created this crisis in the first place.